Welcome. My name is Bill Tate, and I'm a real estate partner in the Orange County office of K&L Gates and a proud member of the K&L Gates firm-wide diversity committee. The diversity committee is proud to present our sixth speaker in our ongoing Conversations About Race series. Clarence Dixon is the executive director and global head of loan services at CBRE. He is also the head of the CBRE UK Diversity and Inclusion Committee, which is responsible for leading implementation of the organization's diversity and inclusion strategy. We will hear more about him and his work during this talk and learn about race on a global basis. Events of last year in the United States put a white-hot light upon issues of race and social justice, but we would be both myopic and naive if we failed to recognize that race and ethnic inequities are global issues, different perhaps in detail, scope, and history, but all too familiar in bearing the fruits of civil discord, economic disparity, and the devaluation of the humanity of our fellow neighbors. Change, however, cannot come without understanding. Ignorance is the enemy to all. Based upon this fundamental precept, the Conversations About Race series was created through the K&L Gates firm-wide diversity committee. The Conversations About Race series, however, does not exist in a vacuum. The diversity committee has been very active this year in putting on programming and launching new and innovative initiatives. These initiatives and programs include some of the following: unconscious bias training. All of the U.S. offices have now completed our first level unconscious bias trainings. We plan to launch the second level training, creating an inclusive culture, in the next few months. Interview training for associates, a collaborative effort between diversity and recruiting, resulted in an interviewer training, which identified the best methods to conduct a structured interview. This training was very well received, and we are now undergoing the process of interview training for lateral partners. Diversity Leadership Pledge. We have rolled out the Diversity Leadership Pledge with our U.S. offices. Working closely with office managing partners, we create strategy and solutions to address diversity in each office. An office-specific plan delves into ways we can recruit, retain, and advance diverse lawyers within the firm. Client engagements. We have seen a dramatic increase in requests from clients on ways to collaborate around diversity-related issues. These client engagements have strengthened our relationships with our clients while providing opportunities to partner with them on programs like the Power of Partnership. The Power of Partnership program involves selecting a diverse 1L law student for a summer associate position in which the student splits his or her summer with the client. We have gone from 2 power partnerships in the past to 8. Now, at this time, without further ado, I would like to introduce Feroze Abbas of our London office, who will moderate this session. Fez.
Thanks, Bill. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, and welcome to the next instalment of the Conversations About Race. Thanks to Bill for those kind words. As you mentioned, my name is Feroze Abbas, and I'm the partner in the real estate team in the London office and chair the London Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I'm very honoured and pleased to welcome our guest speaker today, Clarence Dixon. As Bill mentioned, Clarence is the global head of loan services for CBRE, and he also chairs and heads CBRE's UK and Diversity Inclusion Committee, and is responsible for implementing CBRE's D&I strategy globally. Clarence is very unique in the fact that he was born and grew up in the US, in California, and his stint there included volunteering as a reserve for the US Armed Forces. But Clarence moved to Europe to further his studies in his sophomore year of college, and since then has now lived between Frankfurt and London, and undertakes his global role across the world and Europe, and therefore has huge expertise and experience of various jurisdictions. Clarence, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Clarence, I think I was going to dive straight in with probably the most, well, certainly the question I'm probably most interested in, and I'm sure the audience is Given your multi-jurisdictional experience, we would love to hear your thoughts and views on sort of the cultural commonalities and differences in respect of how diversity is approached across the various jurisdictions that you've experienced, both on a personal level and on a professional level.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you all. It's very seldom that I get to speak to a global audience, and CBRE and Ken Gates have a long-standing relationship globally, and I was very, very pleased to support this initiative. Global D&I is a interesting question. I don't believe that from a global perspective, D&I has gained the relevance that it should gain or would gain in the absence of certain events. I believe that from a global perspective, probably the events that took place in last year in Minneapolis put a lens on inequality and diversity from a position to where it was not only something that was viewed in Minneapolis, in the state of Minneapolis, or in the 50 states, but globally, people took a stand, and it's a very seldom action that you see when something happens in one place in the world, that people around the world stand up and make their voices heard and their views notable. From a personal perspective, as you said, I am a child of the 60s. I was born in the South. I wasn't born in California. I was born in Alabama, and I was born at a time where the movement of racial diversity was a hot agenda point. I remember when I was, I don't know, I think I was 6 years old, and the governor of Alabama was a guy by the name of George Wallace. I'll never forget him. And I was literally watching TV one day after school, and he got on a news conference. He said his thoughts were that all Negroes at the time, as what we were called, should be put on a boat and sent back to Africa. And this was the governor of the state, and he was very passionate about his view, and he had very, very strong views on racial integration, racial segregation. He was totally against it. And I went to my grandmother, and it actually scared me for the first time in my life, because it was the first time in my life that I had taken true notice of it. And I went to my grandmother and I said, do we have to leave home, or are we gonna get on the boat and go to Africa, and where is it? And I had these 1,000 questions. And my father, I had this conversation with my father, and I told my father when I was in the second grade, and I said, Dad, that day, that TV announcement had such a meaningful effect upon me that 2 years later, as an 8-year-old child, I told my father, I don't think I can survive in this environment. I don't think I can be me. I don't think I can become what I want to be, or what you want me to be, or I don't think I can succeed. And surprisingly enough, my father did something what most people will call very, very weird. My father, 4 months later, he left me with my grandmother, and he moved to California. When he told me, he said, son, he said, I hear you, I understand you, I feel you, and I'm going to try and make it better. And for whatever reason, why he chose California, we talked about it later in life, but he ultimately chose California because he viewed California to be more liberal. He thought California to be more diverse because there was a large Asian community, there was a large Hispanic community, and he thought his chances at success would be better, and he thought my chances at success would be better in life because it was of a diverse culture. And he literally left California, left Alabama for a year, found a job, bought a house, set things up, and he sent for me. And I moved to California when I was 9 years old. And I tell you, it was a difference like day and night. And from a personal perspective, I thrived in that environment, but I thrived in an environment. I've always thrived in an environment of diversity. My father never sent me to a all-black school. He sent me to a racially integrated school where there were Mexicans and Asians and white people and Jewish and whoever. And ultimately, I had to make a decision when I was in college, and I was accepted to the University of Maryland, partly because it was the only place that we could afford to go. I couldn't go to UCLA or USC. And I was accepted in Maryland on a partial scholarship, and I wanted to see something different outside of the United States. So at the time, most students who were looking to do exchange programs wanted to go to Asia, to Japan. And I just, stood in line and followed the crowd. I said, I want to go to Japan too. They, all those spots were taken. And my counselor came to me and he said, we have an opening in Germany. You can do a year in exchange program in Germany. And I said, fine, wherever that is, I don't know where that is, I'll go. And I got on a plane and I flew to Germany. I was 20 years old. I spent that year in Germany. It was a fantastic experience for me. I got to see Europe. I got to see cultures that I would never have experienced in the US. After that year, I went home and told my mom and my dad, and I said, I'm going back to finish my degree. I did come back, and I've been here ever since. I'll tell you, I'm 60 years old now. And with the exception of a 24 months secondment in New York City, I have never physically lived in the US. I come home 7, 8, 9, 10 times a year to visit family. I have never given up my American passport. I will be an American until the day I die. But I have never lived as an adult in the US outside of that 2-year secondment. So what I've experienced over the last 40 years was a totally binary view of diversity and how people approach it. And from a personal experience, and I have 3 children, 3 boys who are all adults now. I am today, when I look back, I consider it has been a privilege for me to be able to offer my children the environment that I have in Europe, because I don't have the fear of police brutality or drugs or crime or a lot of the things that that you have in the U.S. because it's just not in the knit of the European culture. At the same time, I speak 3 languages. All 3 of my sons speak 4 languages and English. So it has been a very positive experience for me living life outside of the U.S. Not that I've, in no way, form, or fashion given up on the U.S. It's, I would tell people this. I still say it today. This is where I live, but California is home. But with that said, looking at that and relating that from a business perspective or from a professional perspective, you have Europe, and let's focus on the EU for a minute. The EU, European Union, consists of, I think it's now 26 countries. I call them the United States of Europe. It is not like the United States of America. These are 26 countries with 26 personalities, 26 cultures, 26 laws, 26 ways about doing things. And from their progression, they've never been diverse. Diversity has come about, I would say, probably in the last 10 years. In my experience in Germany, which is where I am now, is where I live, I had the advantage of, I call it the advantage of the American military, because there was a huge military presence here after World War II. And that military presence gave me the option of having both, the advantage of both sides. I still love my butterball turkey and my Wonder Bread. And I still get that through my military friends. On the other side, I still get my Jaeger Schnitzel and my Sauerbraten from the German side. So I view myself as having the best of both worlds. But having that, that military background here allowed me to flourish, because I wasn't exotic being a Black man in Germany. There were thousands of African American soldiers here, and some married and stayed here as civilians, or had careers here and with the military, and remained here as soldiers. It's different when you get outside of a culture like that. When you go to Denmark, when you go to Italy, when you go to Finland, places where they have not had that experience. And when you go to these places, you do become someone who's exotic. You do become someone who is subject to looks, comments, not necessarily things that you would expect of a mature culture, but it's because they have not or did not have that experience of living and being brought up in a diverse environment. The UK is totally different. The UK reminds me very, very much, or let's say London, which is where I spend most of my time. London is a typical. London reminds me of New York City, and it's very similar. Sometimes I think there are cultures in London that I've never even experienced in the US. It's so diverse. But at the same time, I believe, and I believe it then, I believed it then, and I believe it now, that while London is has a very, very diverse culture, it is not necessarily from a DE&I perspective, a diverse society. I am in the property industry, and the property industry has always been, a very, very male, pale industry. There was never a whole lot of gender balance, diversity, ethnic diversity, just totally out the window. And when you start talking to people about it, they ask you, it's kind of, if the wheel's not broke, why fix it? They've survived all these years in that culture, so what's wrong with that culture? Why do they need to change? And they really don't have an understanding of why they need to change. And it's been, since I've been in this role, I've been in this role now for 6 years. It has been an eye-opening experience being an American coming from a totally diverse culture to living in a diverse culture where it's not really diverse. So from that perspective, back to your question, diversity is not diversity everywhere. Diversity in many countries does not exist, and not because it's their fault. It's because it just never happened. They've never had the experience of having to deal with diverse cultures because those cultures still, in many cases, still are predominantly, the cultures that they were raised in from the outset.
Just picking up on a couple of points, Clarence, you mentioned there. I think if I'm understanding you correctly, you're drawing a distinction between diversity in terms of culture, diversity of culture in terms of there being a presence of diversity in terms of different backgrounds, ethnicities, genders in an environment, and then actually the question of diversity in terms of diversity in a workforce or equality of opportunity for people who have diverse backgrounds. Am I right in understanding that that's?
Well, yeah. I mean, literally, you can't have one without the other, because if you don't have a diverse culture, then you don't have diverse opportunities in the workplace. I'll give you an example. I worked for the government. I worked for the U.S. government until 1984. Yeah, no, actually longer, until 1997, after I finished college. I spent the first 14 years after college working for the GSA and for the State Department in Europe, in Germany. And I decided to leave during the Clinton administration when they were trying to bring down big government, and they let people go or let people retire at a certain age, and I punched my ticket at 14 years. And at that time, I decided to try and get into the German employment, get a German job in the German employment community. And one of the things that is interesting about German culture is, in the U.S., you send a CV out, and it just has your experience, your educational background, where you've been, where that's kind of it. Here, it's not only do you send your CV, but you also you have to send a picture of yourself, and that's just a part of the CV process. So I went out and I started applying for my first job, and I took a picture and I put the picture on it. And after about, 40, 50 applications, I wouldn't hear anything back. Or if I hear anything back, it was like, we don't have anything for you. So I looked at that and I was like, I'm clearly qualified. Why am I not getting at least the interview? So I stopped sending pictures. And when I stopped sending pictures, my rate of interviews went up 30% from 0, because people didn't know what I looked like. They looked at my name and they saw that my name was not German. My name was different. My name is Clarence, and a lot of people took it as Clarences, which is a female name, and they thought I was female. So they would write me back, "Dear Mrs. Dixon." That all changed when I got to the interview. That all changed when I got to the interview. People were like, "Oh, you're Mrs. or Mr. Dixon." I was like, "Yeah." Well, this job is taken, sorry. So there was a clear bias against diversity. There was a very, very clear bias. When I finally got my first position, someone took a chance on me, to be honest. And there were 900 people in the firm. I was the only black guy there. And just a typical, U.S. American, I would get in the elevator in the morning. I was, "Good morning, how are you?" And the person across from me were like, "Why are you talking to me? I don't know you." And when you talk about diversity and you're talking about opportunities, if there's no diversity in the community, then there can be no diversity in the workforce. And if you don't, it's like the British used to tell me, if the wheel ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, why should I as a business put the effort of trying to be more diverse when everything is going good as it is with a non-diverse culture and a non-diverse staff base, and my clients are, happy with that, happy as it is. So coming back to the answer to your question, yes, in order to have a diverse talent pool or diverse opportunities, you have to have a diverse talent pool. And that's one of the things that we see in many, many jurisdictions in Europe, that while organizations may be willing to hire people of diversity, there's just no diverse talent pool.
Do you think it's more difficult to have the conversations in terms of increasing opportunity where there is diversity to a wider talent pool, say in Europe or in certain areas of Europe or London, as compared to, say, the same conversations in the US?
I think it depends on where you are in Europe. I don't think it's difficult to have that conversation I don't think it's difficult to have that conversation in parts of the UK. I don't think it's difficult to have that conversation in London at all. I think it will be much more difficult to have that conversation in Glasgow. I think it will be much more different to have that conversation in Wales. It may be more difficult to have that conversation in Coventry. But at the same time, there are areas in the US where, the Southern Belt, where you would have very similar difficult conversations, depending upon the role, depending upon the organization, and depending on their cultural ethic. You still see today organizations, and I have clients today where, interestingly enough, in my space, and I'm in the debt space, in the real estate space, I spend 3 days a month, or I did before COVID, in New York City. Over the last 6 years, I have probably met 10 people of a diverse background in the debt space. Here in Frankfurt, it's only me. And in London, to be honest, in the debt market, and it's even worse in the equity market, there are probably, from a seniority perspective, the number of Black people are probably, you can count on your hand, and 4 of them are Americans. I can think of 1 British guy. With that said, what that tells you is there's a lack of diversity in the talent pool, number one, and we know that for a fact now because we've done our due diligence on that. But I think having the conversation about diversity, it will depend. You can't have a conversation about diversity in Poland because there is no diversity in Poland. It's very difficult to have a conversation about diversity in Italy because there is diversity in Italy, but it's very, very limited. It's very difficult to have a conversation about diversity in Denmark and Finland. And the conversations that you can have about diversity, they only stem from the immigration that has happened over the last few years from immigrants that have come from the Middle East. Well, those are not necessarily people that, from a professional perspective, that you would look for in your talent pool because they don't have those qualifications. So from a business perspective, from a professional perspective, that talent pool does not exist, and there's no need to have that conversation.
Thanks, Clarence. I think you mentioned obviously certain events, and George Floyd being the most recent one. It does appear to be the case that conversations on diversities in all jurisdictions seem to lurch forward on particular events that occur that shine either particular lights on either institutional racism or other issues. I mean, obviously in the global environment now with social media, I mean, possibly part of the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement was because it's so easy for information to get out. But just going back, sort of back to historically back to the 1960s, obviously things hopefully have moved on, and I look forward to hearing what you say about that. But are there any particular events that you would point out that you think have moved the conversation on significantly? And do you still think it's very much a case that it is only those events that really trigger or act as a catalyst for real change moving forward? Because in my limited time in the professional sphere, certainly in the UK, I can point at one or two events where light has been shone and there's been real change as a result of that. But they are quite traumatic events, Stephen Lawrence's killing being one of them. So, I mean, I'm just interested to hear whether you think, in reality, while we talk about a conversation on diversity, and obviously everybody tries to make attempts to move forward with the conversation, actually it's only the traumatic events that allow there to be significant progress made in short periods of time.
Yeah. Look, let's be kind of a loaded question, but I'm gonna answer it anyway. Let's be clear. What happened in Minneapolis is not an anomaly. It happens every day. Just we don't hear about it. And it's not put into it's not all on social media or put into the public framework. And that's not specific to the UK, to the US. You have that, and let's talk about diversity. This is not about being Black. This is about discrimination against ethnic minorities, period, no matter where they are, whether that's in China, whether that's in Australia, whether that's in Bangladesh, whether that's in the UK, whether that's in Italy, whether that's in Egypt. It really doesn't matter. But it only comes to the forefront. It only comes to the forefront when what I call a shocking incident occurs, that people look at it and say, well, it's 2020 or 2021, we should be past that stage. And we're not past that stage. And we're not, and while we've made progress, we've made like I told you, when I think of that TV interview that I saw when I was 6 or 7 years old, compared to the life I lived when I was able to go to college and get an education without an issue, to be able to travel abroad, to be able to have a career, that's progress. So progress it's ongoing and it's continuous. But will we ever come to the point to where it's never an issue? I doubt it, because I think that's just in the nature of the beast. We will always continue to make progress towards parity, and we will always continue to make progress towards an equitable society. But it's very difficult when you have pockets of environments that just don't see the need. So to answer your question, while I do think it's, when you think about the events that happened in 2020 in Minneapolis, everyone wanted to have a DNI manager or a DNI chairperson or whatever the case may be. And interestingly enough, well, what I found quite interesting in what I was seeing is probably about half of those people were Black. Well, yes, that Black person may have a perspective, but does that Black person always have the right perspective? Or does that Black person have a certain prejudice because of his upbringings and the way that he has had the experience that he's had in life? I don't necessarily know. I'll give you an interesting phenomenon. When I was appointed when I was approached by CBRE for the first time on D&I, they came to me and they said, Clarence, we want you to sponsor a D&I group, a diversity and inclusion group. And I was like, oh my God, here we go. What do you guys want me to do? The African American group or Black group or whatever the case may be? And I was like, I'm not going to be anyone's pawn. Interestingly enough, that's not what they wanted me for. They wanted me to sponsor the LGBT network. And I kind of asked questions, says, why do you want me to sponsor the LGBT network? And they said, our CEO said to me, he said, I'd like someone who has a different perspective. And I was always the opinion, and this is the way I've always viewed things. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it to the best of my capabilities and abilities. And I'm not really sure that if a lesbian, gay, or trans person came to me with a problem, that I could actually help them. And if I can't help them, then what value is my role of being the chairperson of this network? Because I'm not gay, I'm not trans, I'm not lesbian, so I don't know what they go through. And I left London that Thursday of having a conversation with my CEO, and I said I'd get back to him on Monday. And Friday night or Thursday nights is the night I get home, and I was having dinner with my three boys who were younger at the time, and we were talking about what we're going through during the week. And I was telling my boys, this is I was asked this question, and my son Cedric at the time he was 11 years old, and I said my middle son Max said, he says, Dad, what are you going to do? Are you going to do it? And Cedric kind of looked at me and he said, what is there even to consider, Dad? And I asked him, I said, Cedric, what do you mean? He says, Dad, you've always told us about the things you went through as a child. While you had to sit in the back of the bus, you couldn't drink out of the same water fountain, you couldn't go to the same restaurant, you couldn't necessarily go to the same school. So these are things. This is 11-year-old kid talking to me. These are the things that these people are going through as well, just differently. So why aren't you the best person to be their mentor? And he said, Dad, what is there to consider? And I looked at him and I smiled and I was like, damn, the 11-year-old kid had to tell me something that I actually should have already known. And I went back to work on Monday and I said, yeah, I'll do it. So my point is, it's when you talk about diversity, it's not necessarily about race. I look at diversity as just that, diversity. And even when we have our networks in the UK or in EMEA, I tell the network chairs and I tell the people within the networks, I said, listen, you can have the BAME network, which is in the UK. We don't have African American, Asian Pacific, Hispanic network. We have a BAME network, which is Black, African, Middle Eastern. But what I like about that is that it encompasses multiple cultures. It's not just specific to a race or to an ethnicity. It's multiple cultures. And because it's multiple cultures, you get so much feedback and you get multiple perspectives. And what that does, and what I tell the networks is, the things that the BAME network is going through, the things that the LGBT network are going through, the things that the women's network are going through, they're ultimately interlinked. They're aligned. They're not very much different. They're, in the women's network, we talk about gender parity. We talk about, things like maternity leave and stuff like that. In the BAME network, we talk about, what I call making sure that we have the right balance. In the disability network, we talk about making sure that we have facilities that support disabled staff. In the LGBT network, we talk about making sure that a person who is gay, lesbian, or trans are able to be themselves. But that's what we talk about in all of the networks, gentlemen. We want everyone. My credo is, if you are a member of the CBRE staff, my job is to ensure that you are able to come to work and be who you are, period. Because your diversity brings creativity, it brings a new perspective, it brings something that we don't necessarily have, because we don't hire everyone from Cambridge or Oxford or Reading anymore. We go to East London College and Manchester University and Liverpool University and Wales University. And because we need that multicultural vision, we need that multicultural view, we need that multicultural perspectives, because our clients are not just Cambridge, Reading, and Oxford graduates. They come from all over the place. I don't want a room full of guys going to a client meeting. I want females in that room. What you can imagine if the client lead on the client side is a lady, and we come in with a bunch of bald-headed guys. That just doesn't work for us. That's not who we are. So it's really about ensuring that we are able as a business to reflect on society, culture, reflect on our clients, and propel ourselves to where we actually should be. But it's a long journey. It's not going to happen overnight.
It's just very interesting to hear you talk about like diversity across the board, and saying it's not necessarily you have to be from a particular a group or diverse to understand and empathize and to be able to assist and help people from other particular characteristic groups. I mean, there's an interesting conversation certainly going on in the UK, which possibly has already happened in the US, about the term BAME and whether it is too broad, and whether it sort of overgeneralizes reference to different cultures and different ethnicities. I mean, from what you've said, I'm very much on board with what you've suggested. That I actually think there's some strength in unity between various diverse groups, even though they may not naturally sit together.
Absolutely.
And I do think, and I'd be interested to hear your view generally about whether the conversation on diversity gets too wrought and too technical about labels and identifying that you belong to a very specific group and what that particular group's going through, and actually whether it should be a much broader conversation, like you say, across organizations.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because we as a business, as a global business, are going through that process right now. So I'll give you another story. I did when I work in London, and a guy from the Caribbean came to me, and he said, "Clarence, you've launched the LGBT network. We would like to launch a BAME network." And and it was, he explained to me what he wanted to promote and to gain parity for ethnic backgrounds. And I immediately, not knowing at the time, at that moment, what BAME actually meant, what the word stood for, what the alphabet stood for, the initial stood for. And my first thought was Black, and because you wouldn't have this in the U.S., but because in the UK, you can be Black, but you can be Caribbean, you can be African, you can be from so many different cultures that there is no finite determination of what it means to be Black. So I took it and I said, I translated it for me, stupidly enough, and I said Black, African, Middle Eastern. That's why I took it. And I was like, no, that clashes. What's it? I mean, as an African American, well, Black African, what's the difference? We're all the same. So I told the guy, I said, no, I will not support that. And he was shocked. He says, you're the most senior Black person in the business. Why won't you support us? And I said, because very simple. I said, and it was an experience I got from the LGBT network, because the LGBT network, I was a person, I was about openness. And if you're going to do something, do it right and let people know you're doing it and be proud that you're doing it and don't hide. But the LGBT network, when we first set up our first network meeting, they told me we can't do it in the building. We can't do it in the office. And I was like, why? And they said, because if we do it in the office, everyone will know that there's a meeting of all the gay people within CBRE. And I was like, so? Well, no, we don't feel comfortable. I was like, fine, we'll do it outside the building. So that reflected upon me. And I was like, okay, so we're going to do this BAME network. And we're going to hold this network meeting. And it's going to be like the Wu-Tang Clan coming together and starting some radical discussions about what it means to be Black in CBRE. I said, I'm not having that. I said, if you guys want to start a network where you cross culture, irrespective of what the culture is, then I am more than happy to support it. So what we did was we started the multicultural network. And the multicultural network was Black, Hispanic, Asian, Australian, French, German, because London is so diverse, and it allowed multiple ethnic groups to come together and give their individual perspectives that we could put as a collective to raise their voices, because they all have the same issues. They were all underrepresented to a certain degree. So we did that, and we formed that network. And what I did say is, if you want to, under the umbrella of the multicultural network, have the BAME network, have the Australian network, or the Asian Pacific network, or the Chinese, whatever you want to do, that's fine. But it's all under the umbrella of the multicultural network, because we have the same objectives, we have the same vision, and we have the same mission. They're not different. And we launched that, and we literally got 700 people in the first 6 months to join. And we all got together to discuss our different views and different perspectives and different objectives, wants and needs. And it was a beautiful thing. And we've maintained that today. So I don't necessarily, and the conversation, coming back to your point, we have this conversation today in the Americas about how do we align that network. And I'm telling the guys, well, we can't align that network to our US counterparts, because there's an African American network, there's an Asian Pacific network, there's a Chinese network, there's a Hispanic network, there's a Jewish network, there's a whatever. And I was like, we don't fit in. I said, you all fit in our box, but we don't fit in your box. So your perspectives are based upon that individual. Ultimately, it's that individual race, where I don't care about race, because we are all a characteristic that is not math represented, and that's the reason why we want to come together. But we all should have the same objective.
Clarence, just sort of building on that, I'm just conscious of time as well, so may have to make this the last question. Just in terms of, and I think we briefly talked about this before the call, in terms of having that broad umbrella and moving the conversation of diversity on, there's one element is having the conversation, which is the starting point, and having that diverse pool to allow, on a professional level, equality of opportunity, etc. But there's another question, or a further more difficult question, about actually implementing the change to assist diversity going forward. I mean, I'd be interested in your thoughts. Again, to the extent you can do, about the various jurisdictions, about what you think the next big steps are in particular jurisdictions, or what you would like to see across the board on diversity in terms of actual implementation, as opposed to just the conversation?
Well, one thing that I've learned in this role is be careful about what you wish for, and be careful about having expectations, and also be careful about putting people in uncomfortable positions or in positions where they can't achieve things. So what we've sort, for example, what I've said, and I totally am fully aligned to this. Again, you have the United States of Europe. It's not the United States of America. I've got 26 countries with 26 issues, 26 different views. And I can't say that the Italians have to do the same as the Polish, and the Polish have to do the same as the Germans, and the Germans have to be the same as the Italians. It's not going to work. You have to let them evolve individually. Some of them will never evolve. Look, you cannot, a perfect example, if you try, we as a business, and I as a leader, while we have a great and a fledgling LGBT network in the UK, it is the only jurisdiction where we have an LGBT. If we were to try and expand that and implement that across Europe, we would come to boundaries. If we were to try and implement an LGBT network in Poland, for example, and just imagine someone in the Polish office who may be gay, lesbian, or trans would see that as progression and take part in that, that person would probably end up in jail because it's not accepted in that culture. So you cannot just take a pen and swash it across Europe and say, diversity is a magic wand. There is no magic wand. You take it country by country, step by step. I think, same as our multicultural network. Well, our multicultural network will probably never work in Italy because Italy is not very multicultural. I can't think of anyone who's not Italian in our Italian office. Now, is that because they won't hire anyone that's not Italian? No. They're just not anyone, there's just no one qualified who's not Italian to fill the roles that we have in that country, other than maybe a PA or someone at an admin or low-level skill set, because that talent pool just does not exist. I can't, we went through a process in our business in the UK of looking at people in my business. And what I tell my recruiters is, if you bring me candidates, if you cannot bring me, 50% of the candidates with a diverse background or female, then you can't be my recruiter. And they all come back and say, there are none. So I have the choice of hiring what's in the talent pool or hiring no one at all, which of course I take what's there because I really don't have a choice. So when you talk about how to put something, this type of framework from a European perspective, there is no European perspective. There's a country perspective. And you have to respect the culture. You have to respect the laws. You don't want to get someone hurt. Like I said, you go to Poland to try and put an LGBT network, you get someone hurt. You could get someone killed by trying to implore that culture or that perspective on that jurisdiction. They're not going to do it. So why should we? So it's a step-by-step jurisdiction or a country-by-country process where you have to let them engage. What we've done is we've said, if you are look, I'm the only Black person in the German office. It's just me. So are we going to start a African-American or BAME network in Germany? Of course not. If I want to participate in BAME activities or multicultural activities, I can do it through the UK chapter. But I don't necessarily have to have it in that country. So you have to look at it from a country by country perspective.
Just a slight follow on to that. Do you think there's an element of cause and effect there in that that the disparity will be exaggerated? Because obviously, if you lack the diversity, the talent pool to start with, in a particular jurisdiction or country, and therefore there's no indication of change, then essentially people from that diverse background aren't going to necessarily want to go to that jurisdiction to provide the diverse talent. So it's it's a chicken and egg situation, and I suppose.
Yeah, but what that doesn't mean you give up. What that means is, it means you can't start at the top, which means you have to start at the bottom. So what you have to do is we have a program called Changing the Face of Property. So rather than going to Oxford, Cambridge, and Reading, where there's just very few people that look like you and I, you have to go to those schools, those universities, those colleges where there are people that look like you and I. And you have to show them that there is an opportunity in that industry, in that occupation. They can come in as apprentices, they can come in as graduates, they can come in as trainees, so that you open your doors up to a wider talent pool. But you cannot expect the talent pool to come to you, because the talent pool will never come to you. You have to go to the talent pool.
I think that's great advice, and probably a great point to call it a day, conscious of time. Clarence, let me thank you very much for such an insightful conversation on race, and for your time, and is very much appreciated from everybody at K&L Gates.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Clarence.
Have a great day, everyone.